that there are benefits for my mind in just being outside with nature, right? There are benefits for my body because I'm moving it and I'm climbing up a mountain, but I'm not thinking about the pain that I'm feeling in my body. I'm like thinking about the mushrooms that I might find. And so mushroom foraging and foraging in general is one of the things where you're looking, but it's really helpful if you don't hold the expectation of I will find, right? Just being with the land is a gift. Just being in the outdoors is a gift and a practice and mindfulness and presence. So, all right. So Pike Place Market is a great place to get an idea of what are some mushrooms that I can forage for, right? Because we know that those are all local products. So when you're looking at Pike Place Market, for those of us that are Washington based, we can be thinking like, oh, where might I find some of these mushrooms? And so these are 6 examples of mushrooms that you can find in the Pacific Northwest. In the top left corner, you can see yellowfoot chanterelle mushrooms, right? And one of the main identifiers of yellowfoot chanterelles is they have a yellow base, their stem is hollow, and they have false gills. And false gills basically means that if you try to pluck the gill out, you cannot get the gills out of that mushroom, right? Morel mushrooms are another example that you can find. They're plentiful east of the Cascades. Chanterelle mushrooms are a golden mushroom that really you can depend on the texture to be able to identify as well as the color. When you break a chanterelle in half, the stem should shred like string cheese. And the beauty of a lot of these mushrooms that I'm showing is that there aren't a lot of poisonous lookalikes for these, right? And so after you've been able to identify, oh, this is a chanterelle, or you've seen it in the store, it should be easy for then us to be able to transfer over to, oh, I think that's a chanterelle, right? Lobster mushrooms are russula mushrooms that are colonized by a bacteria that turns them red. And so mushroom foraging, again, like with the with the golden chanterelle, you really rely on that texture. With the lobster mushrooms, you really rely on your senses in terms of smell. Because as you're walking through a patch of lobster mushrooms, even if you don't see them, you can smell that scent and it just tells you, okay, I need to pause and look around. Hedgehog
Ashleigh,
mushroom.
what does it smell like? Sorry, did you say what it smells like?
It smells like lobster or like seafood. Likewise, it tastes like a seafood taste. Hedgehog mushrooms are called hedgehog mushrooms because unlike yellowfoot and chanterelles, which have false gills, hedgehogs have teeth. So they have little spikes at the very bottom of the cap. And then oyster mushrooms grow out of a tree and they grow in shelf-like stacks. And there are tons of places that you can forage for mushrooms throughout the Pacific Northwest, right? Often, people are pretty reluctant to share their locations of where it is that they forage for their mushrooms. There's just this sense of individualism and just like, I don't want to give my space away because then other people find mushrooms, which I think really leaves people of color out of the box. And so it's really helpful if you look at the different harvesting rules, it gives you an idea of what are some places that you can begin to look, right? All of the national forests within Washington state, a lot of the state parks, my favorite foraging places that are within 90 minutes of Seattle for mushrooms are Toano State Park, which is a 3-mile loop. So it's an exceptionally safe place for you to forage. Wallace Falls is another place that has like a rich abundance of mushrooms. And Bridle Trails, which is in Kirkland, is another place that's a good starting point of going out and finding. Now, I just named parks that have miles of land, right? And so part of the joy of it is going and just looking around and finding and remembering to engage all of your senses as you're foraging for mushrooms. Again, there is a stigma against mushroom foraging, and I know most people within my community have that stigma against mushroom foraging. And so I highly recommend, like, I asked my sister for mycelium for Christmas because mycelium is the seed of mushrooms, right? It grows beneath the ground, and then the mushrooms are the fruit of the mycelium, right? And so mushroom grow bags are a great way just to have an on-ramp to understanding and practicing identifying and learning to trust mushrooms and to trust yourself in your ability to identify mushrooms. So mushrooms requires no gear. In terms of shellfish, oysters are the equivalent of mushrooms of shellfish. Oysters, if you're foraging for oysters, literally the only thing you have to do is get to an oyster beach and walk out at low tide, and you will see the clumps of oysters growing directly on those on those beaches. So oysters is the best on-ramp, I think, to shellfish foraging because it is a very low lift. You get your body into the place where the shellfish is. There's a daily limit of 18 oysters per person. And they request that you shuck the oysters at the beach just so that you're able to allow the oysters or the animals that might be living on the oyster shells to have a chance at a life. After oysters, the next kind of easiest or most accessible form of shellfishing would be clamming. And in order to clam, all you need is your garden tools. Shovel, I don't know what this is called, but this thing, right? And within the Pacific Northwest, or even within Washington, we have a ton of clamming beaches that are within a very close proximity to us. Dash Point, I would say, is probably the best clamming beach. You can get horse clams, manila clams, little neck clams, butter clams, varnish clams. Sorry, let me check the chat.
It's
Mini rake,
not important.
that might be the name. I don't know. Mini rake, that, who knows, right? And even I would say like mini rake, but also fingers, right? They do the job just as well. And then in terms of trying to figure out, well, okay, I know that I want to go clamming. Well, where is my place to go? The Washington State Shellfish website has a breadth of knowledge on what are the open shellfish beaches. So there are over 30 beaches that you can go shellfishing on within Washington State, specifically for clams, oysters, and mussels. The mussels will grow often on the oyster clumps, and so it's a 2-in-1. But I'll give this to Chiffon to distribute. You can see that, for example, Doswalla State Parks, which is in the Hood Canal, which is one of my favorite, is open for oysters January 1st through May 15th. And so you would just go at low tide. And if you're trying to get oysters, all you do is collect them directly off the beach. If you want to grab clams and mussels as well, then there's a shorter season just to, again, contribute to the production of those products. And so from June 1st to August 15th, or actually to September 15th, is the length of their clams, mussels, and oysters season. But if you look at this map, you can actually forage year round for clams, mussels, and oysters within Washington state at a number of parks. One thing to be aware of is that toxin levels do impact whether or not you can go. And so you want to make sure that you're mindful of your own health, because you don't want to get paralytic shellfish like toxin. Yeah. Also, in order to shellfish, you do have to get licenses. And so typically licenses, it's actually only $16 for you to get a full year license. And you can buy that online. You can buy it at local gas stations, a lot of the times in the region you're shellfishing in, or you can buy it at Fred Meyer's. Grocery stores often have them. And so your license, they'll often offer you, like, maybe for $12, a 3-day license, right? A weekend license for people who want to go long, who want to go just once. I always recommend get the year-long license, because you never know if you're going to go again. And honestly, one trip, the year-long license completely pays for itself in the shellfish that you're able to gather. Crab is the next form of shellfish, and that's the one that's the easiest on-ramp to get people to get outside, is to say we can go crabbing. During crabbing season, you can go crabbing at any public marina or dock that's within a region where crabbing is open. In order to catch crab, you do have to have a pot. So I'm just going to show you what those pots look like. So this is a crab trap. And this is a crab trap that if you have a fishing pole, you attach it to the crab trap. When you attach it to the fishing pole, and then you cast it with a chicken leg or some kind of bait like a fish head, and it falls, and the crab will crawl on it and eat the bait, and then you'll catch it when you reel it back up. So this is one where you can only catch one crab at a time. This is a crab trap where when you put it in, the crab will crawl in, but it lays flat. So the crab will crawl back out. So it's really important for this kind of crab trap that you're active, you're proactive, and actively checking your bait pretty regularly. And crabs love, some people say crabs love cat food. My experience has told me that crabs love salmon heads, and crabs love chicken legs, and crabs really love pork chops, like if you want to be fancy with it.
Ashleigh, is that something you said that can be done offshore, or you need to be like on a boat and go out and like cast it?
So I do not own a boat, and I don't know anybody who owns a boat. I only do dock crabbing. And again, any public marina during crabbing season, you can cast a crab pot off of. And it's important for you to know that, because I've gone places where people are like, oh, you can't crab here. And I just kind of asked, well, can you explain more, or what's going on here? And so it's important that, you know, if it is a public marina within a region where crabbing is open, then you have the right to be there and to cast your crab pot. And then this is the last form of crab pot, which is a little bit more secure. It's harder for the crabs to get out. And then in the center, you can see the bait trap where the crab goes. In order to get a crab trap, it's probably going to cost you anywhere between like $40 and $80. I always recommend, like, if you're in a community with like a local buy nothing, you can ask, like, does anyone have a free crab trap that they want to get rid of? Because often foraging can be like a trendy thing that you do one time, and then you opt to go grocery shopping the next day. So if you say, like, for example, you decide you want to go out crabbing and you're trying to decide, where can I go? Again, you want to go back to the Washington State government page, which will show you crabbing seasons, whether or not crabbing is open in that area. the days that it's open, and then it'll give you specific details on that area. For example, Teresa, it'll tell you if you can only crab there by boat or if you can crab by dock and by boat. A lot of Washington coast, you can crab year round. Other places, you'll see a lot of closed until summer 2021, because crabbing is a summer foraging activity where it will open often in June and it will close the beginning of September. And if we're lucky, we might get a winter crabbing season, but that's contingent on availability and just like sustainability of the crabs that are out there. There is something called poor man's crabbing that I highly recommend if you want to just try it and you do not have a crab pot. And poor man's crabbing is, excuse the name, it's where you go out at low tide in the like green seaweed, and you just have a shovel and you just kind of poke around and see if you can find a crab. And some people are probably like, Ashleigh, but no, it's a real thing and it is so much fun. I go with my like nieces and my sisters, and we will all just be out there and we'll just be holding our crab on our little shovel. And so, yeah, that's it for crabbing. For all shellfish foraging, there are restrictions and there are limits. There are, for clams, size restrictions in terms of, in general, not taking clams that are less than 1.5 inches. And likewise for crabs, if you're crabbing for a red rock crab, it should be bigger than 5 inches. And if you're crabbing for Dungeness crab, it should be bigger than 6.5 inches. Dungeness crab are purple, red rock crab are red. And then red rock crab, it doesn't matter the gender of the species that you grab, you can take male and female. For Dungeness crab, any females that you catch do need to be thrown back, just because of, we have not done a great job as a state of managing our Dungeness population. And that's something that I see even compared to what I was able to catch as a kid to now. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but the last thing is razor clamming. And razor clamming is a coastal activity. In order to razor clam, you do need a clam gun. And again, it's a $80 investment for a quality clam gun. You can also just use a shovel, but your likelihood of success in using a shovel versus a clam gun is like, I do not recommend a shovel. I have not been successful at getting a razor clam with just a shovel, even though I have seen people being successful. And razor clam season runs from November through April. It is a highly regulated form of shellfishing. And so it's important that you do check the website to find out when the catch weekends are, because it isn't open where you can go any day that you choose. It's a couple of weekends a month. And as of right now, razor clamming should have opened in November, but because of toxin levels, it has not opened yet this year. Okay. So those are some of the basics of the shellfish that you can collect, the mushrooms that you can collect within the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Washington, and some of the ways that you can access it with and without gear. I'm interested if anyone has any questions or if anyone has any other insights that they'd want to add. Yeah.
Ashleigh, I have a question. I was growing my own herbs, and what that brought up for me was like guilt. And I realized like in foraging and picking and having that direct relationship, it really made me confront the reality that I have a very poor / shallow relationship with the medicines that I put in my body. And so when I was watching you talk about foraging and shellfishing, I really thought about how the question kept coming back, like, what right do I have to go out and forage these more than human world, members of the more than human world, when I don't have a relationship with them. And I think when I go to the grocery store, I'm able to really kind of silence that reminder. So foraging for me, it brings up this feeling of guilt, and it brings up an invitation, I think, to build a better relationship with those that feed and nourish my body. And so I was wondering if you or anybody else in the room has any thoughts on like how to answer that invitation to build a better relationship, because I don't want to just go out and forage shellfish that I don't have a relationship with. And so I want to build a relationship and build reciprocity. And I think that's the other question that kept coming up, is realizing that I have very little reciprocity with these communities. And so wondering how you or perhaps other folks answer that invitation that sometimes comes up via guilt, and that reminder and that invitation to build better relationships with the more than human world.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. It's something that I've grappled with mushroom foraging and with foraging for shellfish, right? Is the fact that there is like this anthropocentrism that puts me as the taker, or as a destroyer, because mushroom foraging happens off trail. So there's damage and harm that's done to the trees, to the environment when you're in those spaces. So something for me that's been really helpful is, before I enter into any space, asking for permission from the land, like honoring, I don't have any right to you. I don't have any expectation from you, right? I'm going in with hope. But ultimately, like, I'm not entitled, right? So there's no sense of a foraging fail. There's no sense of disappointment if you don't get the clams that day, right? You don't get the crab. You weren't entitled to them, right? The land doesn't owe you anything. And so I think it is really easy to divorce ourselves from that when we're in the grocery store. Another thing that's been really helpful for me has been making sure that I do honor, for example, when I'm foraging, like the limits that are set, making sure that if I take too many, like, okay, well, you guys, I need to cover you back up, right? You're entitled to a life. And when I bring you home with me, like, there's a certain level of responsibility that I have not to let your life be in vain, right? Like, literally, I just took you from your home. I took you from the wild. So for me to like grab oysters and then waste those is like, just having that sense of respect and honor of like, I'm grateful for the nourishment that you're providing for me. I'm grateful that I can have access to a shellfish that I wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. Is something that I personally don't take lightly. And it's something that I really try to uphold, the sense of sanctity of being able to forage and being able to use resources well. So for me, that's the way that I've kind of navigated, but it is like a consistent tension. I'm curious if other people, though, have other thoughts, other ways that they've kind of navigated the tension that's named.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, within like indigenous community, I work with youth a lot. I work with kids a lot, and I think the way that I've found that enables them to start coming to a place where they feel comfortable with that is introduce yourself to one plant. Get to know them, get to know everything about them, and talk to them, and actually build that relationship, right? And we went out yesterday, like out on the Colorado-Utah border to see how the plants are doing. And right now it's like the spring onion and the wild carrots and sago lilies. They're all, like this big. We can identify them when they're this big because we watch them and we cultivate relationships with them year in and year out, right? And so whenever you're building those relationships, that's how I do it, Introduce yourself to that one that you want to learn about, that one that you want to cultivate relationship with, and go from there.
Thanks for adding that. I'm sorry that I didn't leave enough time for questions, but it is time for us to kind of transition back to the main room. So thank you for your presence. Let's go ahead and head back in to the festival.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah.